The private security operation that we're operating both here in the northwest and obviously on a larger scale in London fits into quite a complex structure that, as the chairman has explained, has been built up over a long period of time. The most important message that I'd like to get across to you, which I think is important for all of the security partners in the Games, is that what we've set up as a private security operation for the Games, both Olympic and Paralympic, is completely separate from the day-to-day private security operations that are going on in partnership with forces like GMP all over the country every day, what we call business as usual. So one of the messages that I'm spending a lot of time reassuring people about is the extent to which that separation exists. The second message is that G4S may be the name on the front door of the private security operation for the Games, but actually it's the entire British security industry that is involved in securing the Olympic Games for the nation. And I think it's right that these kinds of fora, BSIA fora, are staged so that we can talk about that both within the security industry and with our clients, whether those clients are directly affected by the Games or not. And as we've seen from the guys, there's clearly very few organisations around the world, around the country, that we're providing security services to that aren't in some way affected, even if it's only in terms of moving goods and supplies around the country during the Games time period. But just to step back into the structures, just so everybody's aware, we were lucky enough to be awarded what was called the ODA contract in 2008, which means that we've been protecting the construction of the Olympic Park since then. And that's given us an extraordinary level of insight into what has been a fantastic £9 billion construction project. Something which I think as a nation we can be incredibly proud of, and something which I'll talk about later I think will be part of the legacy, as Brian has alluded to, for us as a nation and as a place to host major events. Later on in this process, clearly, as the chairman has explained, there was a major negotiation with LOCOG about how private security would be involved in the Games. And I don't know whether it's sort of widely said enough that LOCOG took an extraordinary step to turn security into a sponsorship category. A brave step, I would suggest, and one that we talked to them about over a number of years, and not just we, but other players in the security industry. It's a brave step and an example of how LOCOG as an organising committee has broken new ground in a lot of areas. So that allows me to stand up here not just as a supplier of private security services, but as a proud sponsor of the Games. And as I say, something that no security company has previously been able to say, and that brings with it responsibilities as well as opportunities. The third part of this slide is really talking about what we call the halo, and that is really understanding something that I've personally, as you've heard, worked on for 6-7 years now, understanding how the private security industry is going to work with other organisations that aren't directly on the front door of the Olympic Games, whether that's the organising committee or otherwise. And really what's behind this slide is the enormous amount of work that we're putting in place, not just with the direct Olympic family, the sponsors and suppliers, as well as the public sector organisations and police forces that are involved, but also those private sector organisations that are affected in some way, shape or form by the Games, or indeed want to take make an opportunity out of the Games. And clearly there are some very major opportunities given the amount of money that is being spent. As an organisation, we've approached this both, for those of you that know sort of both sides of the G4S business, we've approached this both from our secure solutions business, but also from our cash and valuables in transit business. And there's some really interesting work that I know is going to be explained over May about how we're getting very heavily involved in public-private collaboration about keeping the cash moving during the Games, particularly obviously in London, but across the whole country at a time when enormous amounts of cash will be changing hands. Just to give you the background detail, the guys have talked about the scale. We're in the process of recruiting a security workforce which, with augmentation from the military, will add up to a 24,000 strong venue security workforce. And this slide just shows you the roles that these guys and gals will be fulfilling. all over the country. So wherever LOCOG is commissioning security overlay, this overlay takes the form of several or all of these roles, provided by members of this 24,000 strong operation, many of whom are already deployed. So be under no illusion, we already have something not far short of 3,000 people deployed, providing some form of asset protection or other services in support of the overall security overlay that LOCOG and its security partners in government has commissioned, and very often in support, of course, of our police colleagues who are dealing with the issue as a whole through their National Olympic Security Coordination Structure. In terms of breakdown, just so people are aware, because this is a really major opportunity for us as a country and particularly as a security industry, about 70% of the people that would be deployed into venue security will be involved in some form of search and screening operation. So, out with the football venues, that's airport-style search and screening operations, and as I've indicated earlier, those operations will be provided not just by G4S employees, but by many subcontractors across the industry, the security industry. Many of you represented here today will be involved in some way as part of the supply chain that we have assembled. The really exciting thing about this whole structure is that somewhere in the region of 10,000 people will earn the right to have a security industry authority licence for the first time. So, if nothing else, in legacy terms, we're going to be leaving that number of people with a licence that they can use to start a career in the security industry and work for the next 3 years of the licence duration. I think that's an incredibly significant initiative that LOCOG and their government funders have taken. And clearly we're in the business at the moment of starting to train people so that they can earn those licences. The scale of this is clearly unprecedented, and as an organisation, apart from ring-fencing this so that there's no diversion and everybody that's involved in this operation is doing this and only this, we are putting enormous effort into ensuring that it is successful, not just in the context of a substantial threat environment, but also, as Brian's indicated, in the event that something changes to move things up to severe or even critical as far as the threat environment is concerned. We've created an operation which is nationwide to do this. I'm really proud to say that a lot of that operation springs from the northwest. Manchester is a particular area and centre of excellence for us anyway, based on many years of really event-related work and partnerships with organisations clearly such as the City Council, the police themselves, and the private sector organisations here that are heavily involved in events, most recently organisations like the football clubs and Media City. And it's interesting that a lot of these senior expertise that we're deploying to help this is drawing its experience from events that we're very used to working on a public-private collaboration basis, and a great example of that, which we've heard, is actually particle forces. It's something that we've done for years, and I think we do as a nation extremely well, and it's that kind of expertise that we're deploying in support of the Olympic Games. Clearly, it's a massive recruitment exercise. There are some numbers here. I hope some of you have seen some of this recruitment activity. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that as I left the office in Canary Wharf this morning, we'd just passed 80,000 people applying for a job to work at the Olympic Games in security. Clearly, we're in the job of whittling those down to the 24,000 we need, less than 7,500 military search. We were also very heavily involved, and I know other people in the room will have been involved, in the Bridging the Gap scheme, which is getting upwards of 3,000 further education college students the opportunity to enter the security industry. So those people that graduate from that scheme, many of whom are studying here in the Northwest, will become G4S employees for the period of the Games, get full role-specific training and venue-specific training, and also Olympic orientation, but also, in addition to that experience, walk away with the ability to be an SIA licence holder and carry on working in the industry, which I think is not just the 3,000 people that we will recruit out of Bridging the Gap who are benefiting. Some 10,000 people on that scheme have already been through a door supervisor course. So it's exciting for the private sector security industry. And as I say, this is not a London-based recruitment operation. I can tell you that of those 80-odd thousand applicants, a very large number of those come from both the North West and from Scotland, which are two very big recruitment centres for us in our campaign. I said I would talk a little bit about partnership working. Quite often my head explodes with this because the stakeholder and relationship map for delivering 24,000 security workforce at the Games is something which we as an organisation certainly, and I don't suspect anybody else, have really had to deal with over such an extended period. You've got all of the sports and event stakeholders in this, which, you know, and I've conveniently left out the IOC in all of this, who also have a view, indeed are in town today, looking at all of this. But the organising committee and all of the 205 national Olympic committees have something to say about how security is going to operate, and all want something slightly different and need to be talked to. International federations to the individual sports that are involved in this are a further complicating factor. And then the teams themselves, all of whom have different preferences, and anybody in the Northwest here who's been dealing with some of the training camp environments will know that they all have their own preferences and egos, which we all have to work with. I spend an enormous amount of my time nowhere near the Olympic Games and the Olympic venues in local and central government, ensuring that messages and requirements are properly communicated. The sort of cat's cradle, which started for us just with the Olympic Delivery Authority as a non-departmental public body, has just mushroomed. And particularly now that we have colleagues from the military as well as colleagues from the police working, that we work to or alongside, it's an enormous amount of time that one has to spend to ensure that messages are consistently transmitted across that stakeholder map. Clearly, in addition to the £600 million that Brian's talking about, which is going into the policing world, part of the reason for this massive stakeholder engagement plan is that there's an additional sum of money that is being spent by LOCOG, but is being given to LOCOG by the Home Office and DCMS, and it's they that we have to spend an inordinate amount of time explaining and working through things with. The local authority world has become extremely important for us as well in all of this, and I'm proud to say that one key area of that is our crowd modelling capability, which we've found to become extremely relevant now that the torch relay plans are really hardening up and in most cases are more or less finalised. And that crowd modelling capability is very much built up here in the Northwest, both in the academic and the private sector. Indeed, our professor who leads all of that is based here in the Northwest and has done a lot of work with victory parades and so forth here in Manchester, the city centre, as part of building the capability that he's built for us. The private sector side of this is complex as well, and I think goes back to my old life in thought leadership. And what we did at the outset of this was to say that we should, as a nation, we needed to treat the Olympics as a temporary member of the critical national infrastructure. And so it's that kind of thinking, those of you that deal with CPNI and other advisory bodies like HOSDB down in London will be familiar with, but it's that kind of critical national infrastructure thinking that we've applied here. And so we are seeing efforts to harden elements of the critical national infrastructure, whether through requests for policing or requests for private security or both, still coming through as people start to think about what the final impact on the games will be, on their operation, remembering of course that 85 to 90% of the critical national infrastructure that may be supporting the games is in private sector hands, or at least in private sector operation. And then it's last but ought to be first on here, we spend a great deal of time talking to fellow security providers. We will have at least 15 security companies working for us in our supply chain directly, and many more companies that we're working alongside, whether that's where there's an overlay on an existing venue that has an incumbent provider, or at some of the live sites that you've heard about. Today's 100 days to go, as everybody's probably read in the papers. That's phenomenal, but from a security point of view, it's 145 days to go, because, and more, frankly, because we need to be thinking right through to the end. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for us is to ensure that whether we're at Old Trafford or the Olympic Stadium, we maintain the levels of integrity that we start with at the opening ceremony right through the games, both the Olympics and the Paralympics. And certainly that's the focus of our operation. And some of the deployments that we'll be putting out in total during the Paralympics are not far off the scale of the deployments that we'll be putting out through the Olympics. It's a oft-quoted fact, but it's worth remembering that the Paralympics is bigger than a Winter Olympics. So it's not just an afterthought, it's a massive planning event and security event. The command post exercise world is really, it's been going on for some time now, but my personal view is that there's a lot more work to be done there. We're putting a lot of effort into the forthcoming command post exercises and other testing and exercises. And as Brian said, I think that there'll be lots that comes out of that in regard to what will happen if the unfortunate circumstances of an increase to either severe or critical takes place. It's not necessarily that any change to severe or critical will require additional manpower, just additional standard operating procedures which we'll all need to communicate and implement very quickly. The level of command and control integration, both locally in a venue like Old Trafford, but also across the games, between the public and private sector, I think is pretty much unprecedented. So the operation at a venue level, which starts with what's called a VSCC, a Venue Security Coordination Centre or Control Centre, is clearly going to be multi-agency and involve the private sector in the sense that Chief Arrest will be involved in those venue security centres. But just to reassure you, there's similar levels of integration all the way up through the C3 structure that local, the police and the government have put in place for the Olympics. Right up to and including, if necessary, the sort of Cobra type level if things do go to severe and critical. In taking that testing and exercising regime and command and control very seriously, our focus is on tackling the unplanned. And the unplanned ranges, as Brian said, from an unlikely pairing of football teams that might cause all sorts of issues that we hadn't perhaps thought of, right through to heads of state deciding after all they do want to come because one of their athletes has surprisingly done rather well and is in line for a medal. The last piece that I want to talk a little bit more about is legacy. The London organising committee, and when it was the bid committee, won the Games in large part because they put a fantastic legacy story forward. I think the security world, whether it's public or private sector, has a dramatic, fantastic opportunity to prove itself. The London Games is doing things in a security environment that is just unparalleled. The Summer Games have never been hosted post 7/7 in such an obviously threatened environment. I don't mean to scaremonger here. We are, of course, only at substantial, and that's absolutely correct. But if as Brian says, if we pull this off, we have dramatic opportunities to turn all of our major cities, not just Manchester and London, but all of the major cities that are involved in the Olympic Games, into fantastic host cities for future events, where nobody will have any question that we can carry off whatever it is that they want us to host for them in our cities. We will only do this if two things apply. One is clearly we get it right on the day, as Brian has said, but also if we have a bit of humility. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do as a business, by using the UK and and that includes here in the Northwest as a centre of excellence globally, is to apply that humility in a way that says, let us tell you how things didn't go quite so well as how things did. And I think as a sort of BSIA level, there's lots of learning which will enable us to show that we've taken some of the lessons on, provide better services domestically to our clients in the public and private sector, but then also turn British cities and other parts of the UK into fantastic hosts for events. And we all know that given the levels of investment that have gone into the Olympic Games, we've got a really serious vested interest in us being successful in persuading those organisations to bring their events to us over the next 10, 20, 30 years. We've had some success. We were very heavily involved with the World Athletics bid, but we also have some failures. And I think what we want to see is cities like Manchester, as a result of what we do in security, if nothing else, at the Olympic Games, winning more major events. And I'm certainly committed to us doing that, and look forward to being in Manchester more often to help secure those